Hey everyone, welcome back to Genai's World News. We've got a packed show today, so let's get straight into it. We're starting with breaking and deeply troubling news out of Ukraine. Russia launched a major barrage of missiles and drones at the capital, Kyiv, in what can only be described as a brazen act of timing, striking just hours before a critical NATO summit was set to begin. Both the Financial Times and BBC News are reporting on this attack, and the details are grim. According to BBC News, at least 10 people have been killed in the strike, and the city's top military administrator confirmed that 46 others were wounded, among them 5 children. This is the second Russian assault on Kyiv in the span of just 1 week, signaling a dramatic escalation in the Kremlin's air campaign against the Ukrainian capital. The Financial Times reports that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy wasted no time in responding. He went before the international community with an urgent plea, calling on NATO allies to urgently supply Ukraine with additional Patriot air defense interceptors. The message was clear: Ukraine's current air defenses are being stretched to their limits, and without more support, cities like Kyiv remain dangerously exposed. The timing of this attack is not lost on anyone. Striking on the eve of a NATO summit sends a pointed message from Moscow to the alliance gathering to discuss, among other things, continued support for Ukraine. It's a show of force, and a brutal one at that. Staying in the region, there's another significant angle to the Ukraine conflict making waves today, and this one is about Ukraine going on the offensive. BBC News has a detailed explainer from their Eastern Europe correspondent Sarah Rainsford on why Ukrainian strikes targeting the annexed Crimean Peninsula are proving to be such a meaningful strategic and symbolic blow to Vladimir Putin. Crimea, as many of you will know, was seized by Russia back in 2014 and has since been treated by Moscow as Russian territory. But for Kyiv, it remains illegally occupied Ukrainian land, and it's a prize Putin has staked enormous personal and political capital on holding. BBC News outlines that Crimea isn't just strategically vital as a military hub for Russian naval and air operations in the Black Sea. It's also deeply embedded in Russian nationalist identity. Putin has presented the annexation of Crimea as one of his defining achievements. When Ukrainian forces successfully strike targets on the peninsula, whether military infrastructure, supply lines, or logistics hubs, it does 2 things simultaneously. It degrades Russia's operational capacity in the south, and it punctures the myth of Crimea as an untouchable Russian stronghold. Every successful Ukrainian strike there chips away at the image of invulnerability that Putin has carefully cultivated. As Sarah Rainsford puts it for BBC News, this is precisely why Crimea continues to be a high-value target for Kyiv, and why those strikes sting Moscow far beyond just the physical damage they cause. Now, while world leaders gather for that NATO summit we mentioned, there's a cloud hanging over the proceedings that goes beyond the war in Ukraine. The Financial Times is reporting that Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan's ongoing crackdown on comedians and journalists is casting a real shadow over the diplomatic gathering. Turkey, of course, is a NATO member, a critical and sometimes complicated one. And the FT points out that Erdoğan's increasingly authoritarian approach to free expression is creating significant discomfort among alliance partners who must balance security cooperation with concerns about democratic backsliding. Comedians and journalists facing legal pressure, arrests, or intimidation in Turkey aren't just a domestic issue. They become a talking point at a summit where NATO allies are trying to present a united front on values as much as military capability. It raises uncomfortable questions about what exactly the alliance stands for when one of its own members is cracking down on its own people for cracking jokes or reporting the news. This is the kind of tension that rarely makes it into the formal summit communiqué, but it absolutely shapes the conversations happening behind closed doors. The FT's reporting makes clear that this friction is very much present as leaders convene. All right, let's shift gears for a moment to a story that is frankly wild. And it sits right at the intersection of sports, politics, and the kind of thing you could only really imagine happening right now. Politico is reporting that the White House, yes, the actual White House, got directly involved in an effort to overturn a red card received by U.S. soccer striker Balogun during the 2026 World Cup. And we're talking about President Donald Trump himself reportedly getting involved within minutes of the card being shown, as Balogun faced a suspension that would have kept him out of a crucial upcoming match. Now, the World Cup is being co-hosted by the United States this year, which gives Washington a particular interest in how the American team performs. But direct presidential involvement in a soccer disciplinary matter? That's a level of engagement that's raising eyebrows well beyond the sports pages. Politico's report details what they're calling an inside look at the White House's push to get Balogun back on the field, describing it as a coordinated effort that moved remarkably fast once the red card was issued. Whether or not the effort ultimately succeeded, the story itself speaks volumes about how this administration operates and how seriously the politics of the World Cup are being taken at the very highest levels of the U.S. government. Now for a story that is equal parts heartbreaking and deeply inspiring. BBC News is reporting on the incredible survival of a young Venezuelan girl named Fabiana, who was trapped under the ruins of a collapsed 10-story residential building for a staggering 32 hours after two powerful earthquakes struck Venezuela in June. Think about that for a moment, 32 hours, buried under rubble. And when rescuers finally reached her and asked how she survived, Fabiana's answer was both gut-wrenching and remarkable in its simplicity. According to BBC News, she told them, "I ate ketchup and cheese. Whatever food happened to be within reach in the darkness, that's what kept her going." The detail is striking, not just as a moment of human resilience, but as a window into the conditions she endured. Trapped, alone, in the wreckage of a building, a child finding whatever she could to hold on until help arrived. BBC News reports that the earthquakes caused significant damage across Venezuela, with multiple buildings affected. Fabiana's rescue was one of the more remarkable outcomes amid what was a devastating natural disaster for communities in the region. Her story has captured attention worldwide, and honestly, it's not hard to understand why. Moving to the Caribbean, there's a dire economic situation unfolding in Cuba that the Financial Times has been tracking closely. The FT reports that Cuban farmers are now rushing to sell off their land, driven to desperation by a severe fuel shortage that the outlet links directly to a fuel blockade maintained under the Trump administration. The consequences on the ground are stark. Without adequate supplies of oil and diesel, Cuban farmers cannot power the equipment needed to harvest their crops. The Financial Times describes a situation where produce is literally being left to rot in the fields, food that could feed people, wasting away because there's no fuel to bring it in. This is hitting an island that was already under enormous economic strain. Cuba's communist government has long struggled to maintain food security, and the combination of chronic underfunding and now this acute fuel shortage is squeezing ordinary Cubans from every direction. The FT notes that access to food more broadly is being hampered, with the ripple effects spreading from the agricultural sector into everyday life. The decision by some farmers to sell their land is particularly significant. It suggests a level of desperation and economic hopelessness that goes well beyond a temporary crisis. When farmers give up on their land, the long-term consequences for food production can last for years. Let's close things out with a fascinating story from the world of artificial intelligence and finance. The Financial Times has published a deep dive into why two of the biggest names in AI, OpenAI and Anthropic, may actually struggle to pull off an IPO, despite the enormous hype and valuations surrounding both companies. The FT's argument centers on a brutal economic reality at the heart of the AI race. Staying at the frontier of artificial intelligence, the cutting edge of model development and capability requires absolutely punishing levels of capital expenditure. We're talking about billions upon billions of dollars in compute, infrastructure, and talent. The costs don't just not go away, they keep growing as the technology advances. But here's the tension. The penalties for falling behind that frontier may actually be even worse than the cost of keeping up. In an industry where being second best can mean irrelevance, there is almost no room to slow down investment in order to make financial returns look good on a public company balance sheet. And public markets, as we know, tend to want profits, or at least a credible near-term path to them. This creates a genuine strategic dilemma that the Financial Times lays out clearly. Going public means subjecting yourself to shareholder scrutiny and quarterly expectations that may be fundamentally incompatible with the long-term, capital-intensive bets these companies need to keep making. It's a fascinating window into the economics of the AI industry, And a reminder that being the most hyped company in the world doesn't automatically mean you're ready for Wall Street. And that's a wrap for today's edition of Genai's World News. If you found today's stories informative, and let's be honest, there was a lot going on, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss an episode. We'll see you next time.